Well, I'm here today because I think this is a very important issue that we need to be talking about. I think that there's something systemically wrong with the United States of America, how we continue to prosecute and persecute our warriors. And my own episode that I went through in 2003 is a reason why I'm here, because I think that lends some credibility and validity to address this issue.
And I am one of the people who's responsible for telling him to run, because until we get men like him up there, we're going to have more incidents like this in our lives. So it's important. Many of you have seen him speak before. He's come out here today, and he was humbled by all of the attention. He remains a man of great humility in spite of all the national attention that's been foisted upon him. But when we learned of the rally, when we sat with Vicki and Scott Behenna and learned about the rally, we made a decision that day that we would be here. Lieutenant Colonel retired Allen West.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It is really and truthfully an honor to be here with each and every one of you today. It is great to be back in the state of Kansas, a place where I spent almost 9 years of my military career. Here to be at Fort Leavenworth, where I spent 2 years. And if you don't believe that God is ordained what we are standing here for today, look up here at the beautiful Kansas sky. Look at the beautiful weather that we have, when just a little while ago, yesterday, the type of weather that was coming through here. This is important that we have gathered here today. And many of you do know about my situation back in Iraq in 2003. When as a battalion commander, I decided to take an action against an Iraqi policeman who was withholding some information that we needed to make sure that we did not have the continued exposure of the men in my battalion to roadside ambushes and attacks. And I used a good old Southern psychological intimidation trick where I told him that I was going to kill him. And I fired a pistol. And I fired my service 9mm over his head. And of course he did come forward with the type of information that we needed. And I put my cell phone report to my commanding officers, and I let them know exactly everything that had happened. And I was taken out of command, and they threatened to send me through court-martial, but in the Article 32 hearing, it was decided that it was not worthy of a court-martial. I was fined $5,000. And then upon coming back to Fort Hood, Texas, at the completion of my deployment, after 22 years of active duty service, I submitted my retirement papers. And I retired as a lieutenant colonel with full benefits and privileges and my title. That's why I'm here today. Because there's a saying, there but for the grace of God, go I. It could have been very easy for me to be sitting right there behind those walls of the disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth. But it was because of the American people. It was because people found out about my story that I was able to be standing here in front of you. And I tell you this, that the reason why what happened in 2003 is because I could stand here right now and commit to each and every one of you, commit to each and every one of the families here, that I will not rest, I will not tire, I will not grow weary until those 10 men are free and those sentences are taken away. You've heard all the stories from the families, but this is what I want to share with you. And I know you've been sitting out in the good hot Kansas sun, getting the great tan. But there is something upside down in the United States of America. That's right. There is something terribly wrong in this country. And when I think about, as I flew out here from the time of my experience in 2003, I think about Captain Roger Hill, a young infantry captain that was relieved of his command and prosecuted in Afghanistan. I think about the Haditha Marines, who a member of Congress even had the audacity to call them cold-blooded murderers. I think about the U.S. Navy SEALs, who we tried to prosecute for punching a guy who was the one responsible for killing, the mutilation, and the dragging of the bodies of Americans in Fallujah. I think about Marcus Luttrell in August of 2005, when they made the decision that caused the lives of 19 special operators in Afghanistan. I think about Marine First Lieutenant Ilario Pantano. And as I think about each and every one of them, and it brings me to where we are today, thinking about these 10 men, 10 warriors, 10 of America's best that are sitting there in confinement. How is it that this country has gotten so upside down? How is it that we are now taking the people that will sacrifice to defend the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy, and we take away their freedoms and liberties? It's because of some very simple things. And the first thing is, we have a failure to understand and identify who this enemy is and their tactics. If we don't understand this 21st century battlefield, that you are always going to have non-state, non-uniform belligerents that realize what our tactics are, we don't understand their tactics, they will continue to hide in and amongst civilians. They will continue to put our soldiers in untenable positions where they have to make very quick decisions. And any of you that's ever been out there in a combat situation, you know one simple thing. In a firefight, you got about 3 to 5 seconds, and people start losing their lives. And the enemy recognizes that. That's why they fire upon our men and women, and then they run into houses where women and children are. That's why they go and they get young children, they hold them up as shields while they continue to put fire on our soldiers. If we don't have people that recognize that we're fighting against an enemy that has no respect for life, not their own, not anyone else's, but yet we continue to punish our own at the behest of the enemy that we refuse to identify. This is not an overseas contingency operation. This is a war. This is a war for our survival. A lot of people have talked about something today called the ROE. How can you prosecute a war when you tell our men and women in combat you cannot fire until fired upon? How can you prosecute a war when you tell them that you must alert the enemy before you go into an operation? How can you prosecute a war when you say, unless you see hostile intent, there is nothing that you can do? And that's why just recently down in Kandahar and over in Helmand province in Afghanistan, that the enemy, once our Marines and soldiers would close in with them, they just laid down their weapons and walked away. Because they knew that if they didn't show hostile intent, if they didn't show that they had weapons, they could walk away. Just the same as people going out in the middle of the night with a wheelbarrow and a shovel, but yet they get questioned. Did you know that that person had hostile intent? What did you think that person was going to do? Or if you're sitting on a forward operating base, remote up in Afghanistan, and you have mortar and rocket fire coming down on you, and you look up in the hills and you see a person with binoculars, can you engage that person? Well, I have to tell you something. As a seasoned combat veteran, I know that that person is not up there bird watching. But yet we have gotten to the point where we are putting our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in positions where they cannot take the initiative, where they have to fight reactively. And when they fight reactively, you see what happens. They lose their lives, and the enemy continues to exploit. We find ourselves in the situation we're in the United States of America because we are confused. We don't understand that this is a combat operation. This is not a police action. This is not a thing where it's dragnet over in Iraq or Afghanistan. That is not a circumstance where we need to have our soldiers come up and provide evidence. If you cannot take the word of an American combat soldier that this is a bad person, and this person needs to be taken off the streets. This is not about detaining. This is about imprisoning them, and they don't get to come back out until they quit or they give up. That's the bottom line with combat. It is about imposing your will upon another, and that's not what we are doing. It is not about what you see happening in Afghanistan, where a tribal leader or a father can walk up with a piece of paper and say, I pledge that my son will not go back and join with the Taliban. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. If it's good enough for an Afghan tribal leader or father, it's good enough for Scott Behenna to do the exact same thing for his son up there. It's good enough for all the fathers that are here to say, you turn my son back over to me just the same as you're doing in Afghanistan. It is about realizing that we cannot continue on with these convoluted orders, not understanding truly what are the goals and objectives that we have our men and women over there in these combat operations for. It's about simply 5 things. You find the enemy. You fix them in position where they cannot maneuver. You engage them, you destroy them, and you pursue them. Amen. And until we have combat leaders that can go and articulate that, we will continue to have young men that go out and they don't understand their mission. They don't understand what they're being told to do. But even worse, you have leaders that will not step up and take responsibility for giving them misinformation or bad guidance or bad objectives. It also comes down to this. You can't have political correctness on the battlefield. You cannot sacrifice our young men and women for political correctness. You know, this past week, John Walker Lynn had the ACLU file a petition for him because they felt his rights were being violated because he did not have the opportunity to go with his prayer rug and pray with other Muslim prisoners. Well, let me tell you something about John Walker Lynn. He probably should have been hung. Because here's an American that took up arms against American soldiers. That, from what I understand, is called treason. That, from what I understand, is a traitor. But out of the benevolence of who we are, we did allow him to keep his life. But I really don't care what happens to John Walker Lynn in prison. Because as you just heard, we have our own men and women in confinement, solitary confinement. But yet we have the ACLU concerned about what's going on with John Walker Lynn. We have the ACLU and all of these other groups going down to Gitmo and making sure that these guys get gourmet meals and have their opportunity to go out and enjoy the Cuban sunshine and the nice sea breezes. How many times have you seen the ACLU or any of these other groups to go and make sure that the men and women that we're imprisoning here in Leavenworth, these 10 individuals, are protected and taken care of? There is something upside down in this country right now. When you hear about the fact, the underwear bomber, where is he sitting? He's sitting, living it up in some American prison, waiting for his day in court. When you hear about the gentleman, the Somali pirate, how many people remember the Somali pirate? He's sitting somewhere waiting for his day in court. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the United States ship coal disaster. This administration, this Department of Justice decided they were not going to bring him to trial. But how long did it take before we brought these 10 warriors to trial? How long did it take before we put them in prison? But yet, what are we doing with the enemy? I don't care what anyone says. You can show this enemy all the love, benevolence. You can bring Oprah Winfrey out. She can give them all the hugs that they want, but they are still going to hate us. Yeah. And how is it that we live in a country where we think that people that are not Americans, people that have tried to kill Americans, all of a sudden are deserving of constitutional rights, where our 10 men and women, our 10 soldiers rather, are sitting there being denied of their constitutional rights? There's something upside down in the United States of America. How is it that we have allowed military JAG officers to take over prosecution of combat operations? The fact now that combat commanders have to get approval from JAG officers before they go into an operation. How is it that we know some of the things that these JAG officers have done, such as withholding exculpatory evidence, and many of the other heinous issues, if you go back and study these 10 cases? This is wrong. And you know what is the most wrong about it? When you go back and you read that book, Lone Survivor, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, our combat warriors are more afraid of JAG officers than they are of the enemy. And the JAG officers know that. And these are JAG officers that I think one simple thing should be done. Before you prosecute an American warrior, you walk a patrol. You get out there in those hills. You get on those alleys. I'm sick and tired of people that graduate from law schools. They get a uniform put on them. They get the bars or the Oakleys of an officer, and they have yet to have been out there with our combat soldiers. There's something upside down in the United States of America. But the last and most important thing, there is irresponsible leadership in this country. It is not the fault of those 10 men that they're sitting there. It's the fault of irresponsible leaders. It's the fault of irresponsible leaders that won't stand up for their men. and take responsibility and say, do not punish my men. You punish me because they're under my command and they acted under my orders. It's the irresponsibility of leaders that don't understand that their positions are there because they're supposed to serve those men and women beneath them, not serve the political gods, and I say God with a little g, of this country. I am sick and tired of the star level officers. I am sick and tired of the politicians that are sending our men and women into these tough situations and they have no culpability. They have no responsibility. They can sit and they can play golf at their country clubs. They can enjoy their nice, five-star hotel visits and all these nice meals and all these nice things and titles because of the men and women who get out there and enable them to have those things. It hurt me to no end today when people came up to me and said, we have tried to take this issue to our congressmen, to our representatives. And I know Vicky Behena has taken it to a U.S. senator. And they said nothing. And they did nothing. And let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. If you allow these same individuals to quote-unquote call themselves leaders of our country, then it's your fault. Because you've got to change this. You've got to make sure that this representative democracy hears your voice. And this is why you must answer the call to action. This past week, the president said that we are ending combat operations in Iraq. Well, I don't know if he consulted the enemy on that. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning. Because we will not allow these 10 men to be forgotten. We will not allow these 10 men to sit over there and rot away while people, politicians and generals go around and pat themselves on the back and talk about how great a job they've done. We are going to free these men, and we're going to do it with your voice. I need you to call your congressman, call your senator, call the Secretary of the Army, McHugh, call the Chief of Staff of the Army, Casey, call the Secretary of Defense, Gates, call the President of the United States. We have got to have men and women that understand what it's like to be on the opposite end of an AK-47, an RPG. We have got to have men and women that know what it's like to be cold, tired, and scared, but still know one thing. The American people are dependent upon you to go out there and accomplish a mission. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to close by saying this. I sat back there and listened to all these great mothers. And when I sat with Vicky Behena down in South Florida, I told her one thing. You've got my life, my blood, and my commitment. Because back in the days of Sparta, when the young Spartan men went off to war, the Spartan women handed them their shield, their mothers. And they said this very simple thing. Come back carrying your shield, or come back being carried upon it. That's what these women have said to those men. These women did not say, come back in shackles. These women did not say, come back in shame. These women did not say, come back as a criminal, come back being accused as a murderer. These women said, I love you. Take this shield of honor. And as many generations before you, stand in the ranks as a warrior. Lock your shields with others and defend this great constitutional republic. Vicky and all the mothers out there, this Spartan will make sure that your sons will come home carrying that shield with their honor, with their integrity, and their character intact. God bless you all. God bless those 10 men, and God bless these United States of America. Thank you so much.